a discussion about Janice Fiamengo's book, Sons of Feminism, Men Have Their Say, with Paul Elam, Janice Fiamengo, and Tom Golden. Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you here with us. I'm here with Janice Fiamengo and Paul Elam, and I'm Tom Golden, and we're going to talk about Janice's book, Sons of Feminism. And I want to take just a minute to talk about why I think her book is important. You know, we're in a fight, we're in a battle. And MRAs basically are dwarfed by the number of people who are not MRAs. And we're dwarfed not only in number, but in firepower. We've got very little. And so we need to be careful about the ways that we try and go about changing people's minds. And, you know, what do? We're usually a bunch of logical people, right? What we do is we go and we talk about statistics. You know, gosh, 93% of men, it's 93% of men are killed on the job. You know, the job fatalities are men. And, you know, we talk about all kinds of things. Imagine going and giving a speech someplace and saying, 1 in 6 men are sexually abused as children. Would that move people? Probably not. The blue pill is so impervious to statistics. It doesn't move them. It doesn't make any difference. But a story will make a difference. If you were to tell that same group, let me tell you a story about a 12-year-old boy who was raped by his 18-year-old babysitter. And she got pregnant. And then the judge later said that the boy had to pay child support. It's that kind of story that people have to scratch their head and say, what's going on with this? This is crazy. Because people's minds are built for stories. You know, there's a professor at the University of Maryland who talks about the idea that the brain is built for story. It's not built for stats. If you go to a lecture, what do you remember? You remember the stories. And the feminists have been killing us for decades by telling stories about women and about their hardships and about their discrimination. And of course, these stories are amplified by the media and by gynocentrism, and it's a downhill flow for them. For us, it's an uphill flow, but still the stories, I think, are a much better bet than trying to talk about facts and statistics. Anyway, that brings us to Janice's book, because Janice's book is filled with stories about how this all happened. I mean, fascinating stories. And maybe we can start there. What do you guys think about that?
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
I think a lot about it. I could absolutely write a sonnet about this book.
Yes.
And I'll tell you why that I'm very serious about that. One, Tom, you're absolutely correct. Our lives are narrative.
Yes.
You know, if you look at the work of people like Joseph Campbell and other great thinkers of our time, and even if you look at the work that I've done with Peter Wright over the years, and the work that I do talking about narrative for men,
yes,
about our lives being a series of images and stories, that our lives are not statistics. What they are is they're paintings on the wall that tell who we are,
yes,
that we look at and see every day. And it's so critical. And, you know, you mentioned that, like, the workplace statistic of 93% of workplace deaths are men. But we live in a world where most people are thinking, well, who are the 7% losers who are not dying in the place of women? I mean, that's how they react to
yeah, that's right.
That's
right. It's like that Gutfeld thing we saw the other day about the selective service. I mean, it really shocked me in some ways to realize how blue pill the world really is, both conservatives and liberals. And Janice's book is filled with stories that help you get a sense of what happened. It really gives you ammunition to be able to go into an argument instead of with statistics say, God, you know, this story was about astronomy and about how feminism has infiltrated the astronomy department. I mean, that was fascinating to me, but it gave you exactly what happened, how it happened. And it's like that kind of story helps us to fight, you know, to go out there and fight. Gosh, the Indian guy, the Indian man who described his ideas about men in our culture. But he did so. He said, I came from a caste system where I was Brahmin. I was high in the caste system. And I was able to see how men are discriminated against because I had eyes to see a caste. And that whole section, his chapter is fascinating, about how he could see things that others could not see. So I can't say enough about the book. I could go on and on and on about it. But
I think it's important to note too that one, this is the title is absolutely correct. Sons of Feminism, men have their say. Which I mean, one, we already know from the title that if Janice were out to make a bunch of money, she's going about it very poorly.
Very poorly.
Men having their say is not a highly marketable idea in this culture.
Not only that, but the Kindle version, folks, is $3.99.
Yeah.
So this is affordable for everyone. And I really appreciate you doing that, Janice. I did the same thing with my little book, The Way Men Heal. There's Nandor.
There's Nandor.
It's what that does is that makes this book accessible to anybody. You can pay $3.99 and get this book and read it. Good stuff.
It is a collection of 25 stories. It is considered, according to the description anyway, a sister document to David Shackleton's Daughters of Feminism. However, I'm sure Janice won't be offended if I call it the brother document instead. I'll just go ahead and I had some questions about it. The stories, just like Tom said, are fascinating. Some of them were not new to me at all. As a matter of fact, I know some of the people that contributed stories to that, including Tom.
A very good chapter.
But, yes, it is. That is a very compelling story that I think does help change the narrative. One, Janice, you got originally, I believe, a little over 60 submissions for this.
I've lost track now, actually. I think I probably now have about 80 stories.
Right.
Yeah, I still do have, lately I've had a few men write to me and say that they just heard about the project and they wondered if they could contribute to it. And I said, they can send me their story, but I didn't think I would be able to include it in any future book because I've just been so overwhelmed with narratives. But yeah, my project now still is that I would like to produce at least one other book, although I have enough stories for 2 or 3 more.
Oh, really?
I'm thinking maybe, because I'd like all the stories to be made available to people. And so I'm thinking maybe a website or something like that. I'm trying to, figure out what the best, what the best way, even if not in book form. So it was, and then this is not including the years in which I received emails from men. Like this all started really in 2013 when I gave my first public lecture at the University of Toronto. And then after that, I gave a few more public lectures that my friend Steve Brule put up on YouTube. And it was at that point, in fact, that very night when the first lecture was posted, that men started writing me and saying, I'm so glad you spoke out about this. This has been my experience. And it started, I think, mainly with men talking about their experience at university, which is such a incredibly anti-male environment.
Yes.
That you could do a story every day from here to eternity about all the ways in which the university is anti-male. It cannot be exaggerated. It's lethal. So I got a lot of stories from young men experiencing that at university, being told every bloody day that they're responsible for everything bad in the world, that they're privileged and powerful, that they need to step back. They need to allow their sisters to come forward and to steer the world for the next 30 years in which every wars will end and, famine will be abolished and all inequality will be overcome if only we allow the greater empathy, the greater compassion, the greater wisdom, the greater desire for collective harmony to take control. All the while being, told this while looking around and seeing all sorts of ways in which their sisters are actually encouraged and complimented and congratulated and given special scholarships and all sorts of special privileges that they have no access to. So the emotional and psychological impact of that is absolutely devastating for any sensitive young man.
And your book chronicles that perfectly.
Yeah, it chronicles that. I mean, I was just overwhelmed. I mean, I always had that hunch that was the situation. That's why I started speaking out when I first saw the protest of Warren Farrell's talk in the fall of 2012. That was the beginning of it all that my friends had filmed. And I thought, I'm going to speak too then, because this is a real problem at universities. And now suddenly anybody who even tries to put words to the situation is shut up. So I was, but I was overwhelmed when I started receiving almost daily accounts from men about the pain of their lives. Yes. And so that's why I thought, this should be a book. And I don't expect that any feminist ideologues will be moved one iota by reading any of the stories in this book, because they've all heard them too. And they just say, well, this is what it looks like when you've had privilege for 500 years, realizing that actually, none of these men had the benefit of that.
500, it's been 5,000.
5,000, I should say, exactly. And, this is what it looks like when you finally have to share your privilege. Oh, yeah. So they don't care. But there are a lot of people who, although obviously influenced by our feminist culture, are not totally closed off to the possibility of seeing reality. So I really hope that some of those people will read these stories. And of course, there are many other stories out there too, but I hope some of them will read it. And I also hope that some men will read the book and have the small comfort of realizing that, and of course, my book is not the only forum. You guys have been working a lot longer than I have to make it possible for men to join up with other men and to share their stories. But
it's the only one we're talking about today.
Yeah, I know. So this is the one, where they can see, I'm not alone. I'm not the only, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. Yes. My hunches, my resistance, my anger, my irritation, my sense of shame, all of those things, they're not my own personal neuroses that I need to shut up about and privately overcome. That this is actually a societal problem, that lots of other men have recognized this too. And we've been prevented from accessing the venues where we could talk about these things. That doesn't mean they aren't real. So that's what I really hope would achieve. And it's kind of a sad book. It doesn't offer any solutions. It just chronicles stories of men who've had their lives destroyed in all sorts of different ways, men who have suffered from false accusations, men who lost their jobs because some women, told a story about how they made them feel uncomfortable on the shop floor, or were kicked out of university because some prim little princess was uncomfortable with the guy making an overture to her, a totally non-sexual overture in the case of the story in my book, just trying to be friends with a girl, and he got kicked out of school as a result of that. Stories of men who've lost contact with their children because their wives, alienated their children from them after divorce. Men whose mothers were abusive, who psychologically and physically abused them and their fathers, and then ended up, of course, having to apologize for their toxic masculinity. Just horrific stories of men who've struggled for decades with this kind of institutionalized injustice. And then also just stories of men who haven't had anything in particular happen to them, haven't been personally destroyed, but just have had the barrage day after day after day, month after month, year after year, of hearing about how privileged they are and how they're bad people because they were born male, and what that does to people.
Yes, you get a real sense of, in elementary school, the kinds of propaganda they get, then in middle school, then in high school, and then in college and graduate school. It's fascinating, and these guys are brutally honest. These stories that they're telling, they're brutally honest. They're not cherry picking. They're not making it sweet and nice. They're saying, I screwed up here and I screwed up there, but this is the way I see it now. So my hat's off to them, for their honesty.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think they're incredible stories.
Searing. Just remarkable.
And the other thing that really struck me, and this was the case from the very first email I ever received is how little how little dislike and certainly how little hatred of women there are in any of these men. There is some anger for sure, but the kind of the rage that one encounters in nearly any feminist analysis is simply not here. These men still want to, most of them still want to have good relationships with women, whether in their intimate personal lives or whether just in general in the world. They want solutions. They want to figure out a way that we can fix the gender crisis we've created. And they're still hopeful. Many of them, even though some of those men talk about how there's one who begins his story saying he's 30 years old. He's never been kissed by a girl.
Right.
He's heterosexual. That's what he wants most in his life. He's never had a kiss. He's never had a hug. He will never pursue a girl because this is the one that was kicked out of university and physically brutalized by university security guards because this girl complained about him. And so, and yet still, that's what he most wants. And all of them are like that. They all end by saying that they hope for some process of reconciliation. They hope for some way out of the ridiculous war of the sexes that feminists have inaugurated. So, and I think that deserves to be known too, that all the attribution of misogyny, it simply isn't there. I mean, I feel misogyny. Sometimes I just feel so sick. I feel hatred sometimes when I think about the situation we're in. I have to battle that in myself, but I don't find that's the case with most of the men who write to me.
Right.
Well, and I take it that what you're talking about, Janice, is not your internalized misogyny of the feminist variety. I think that most men, most MRAs, I know where my feelings lie. I've never been angry at women as a group. I am angry about the way women are socialized. I am angry at the double standards that we've set up. I'm angry at the ways that we discriminate against men. I'm angry at gynocentrism, which is alive and well in both men and women. But I have the same experience as you in dealing, and I've dealt at this point with literally thousands of men over the past 35 years about these issues. And over again, I see men who long for connection, who want intimacy, who want to feel loved and want to feel connected to women, but are pulling their hair out about, how do I even make this happen?
Yeah.
And it's very difficult, which is why I'm glad you didn't have any disingenuous panacea summation at the end of your book of what we're all going to move toward. There aren't easy answers to any of this stuff. They're painful and difficult and brutal.
Yes.
But the honesty in it just comes through both in you and your introduction and in the stories themselves. So my hat's off for that.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Janice, did you have a favorite chapter in there?
Oh, well, there's an awful lot that are my favorite. It's hard to.
Yeah, she's going to be more diplomatic than that.
I know. I'm trying to.
It's really hard to say. I started with the story of Pat Kembum Patty. A lot of the contributors are anonymous for obvious reasons, because they're talking about situations at their workplace or situations in their personal life that would be dangerous in various ways for them to be known. But Pat Kembum Patty, and he's a long-term Facebook friend. We've never managed to actually meet up in person yet, but he was somebody that contacted me, years ago when he saw one of my first talks, and his story is really powerful. He talks about the psychological toll for him of going through his formative era in school and then ultimately in university, and coming to a point where he started to have life-threatening health problems. And he suddenly asked himself whether there was any proof in his culture at large that his life mattered.
Right.
And he had to say, no, it doesn't, not to the extent that a woman's life matters for itself. He had a great career, he was doing important work. He was a tenured professor at Canadian University. And that's what he said. He wants the world to change so that his two sons, who are now, just coming into their teenage years, would not grow up and be left wondering whether their lives mattered. And I think it's a really powerful statement. And he is the one that says, yeah, he's attuned to caste. And he came to realize that he had never asked the question, what about me, as a young man? It was always about girls' fears, girls' insecurities, girls' needs. And he realized that he hadn't asked that question because the untouchable in the Indian caste system never asks, what about me? And so he came to realize that he occupied that position as a male in Western North American culture as an untouchable. And it's a very, very powerful statement, I think.
Wow.
I want to add one other thing that sort of dovetails off of that too. And folks, below you're going to see a link to purchase this book, either in soft cover or on Kindle. I highly suggest you do. And there's a particular reason why I want to suggest it to red pill men that are relatively new to all this. It's going to be great reading for anybody. But the most common email I get about the work I do, I'm going to go back first and compare this. When I read The Myth of Male Power back in '93 when it came out, the overwhelming feeling that hit me was, wow, I thought I was crazy. And it turns out that I'm not. That I knew something was terribly wrong. I knew something was wrong, but I could never put my finger on what it was. There was something in the world of men and women that just didn't add up, but I could never figure out what it was. And I read The Myth of Male Power, and a lot of the pieces of the puzzle fell into place intellectually. And that was really a great thing. However, there's another even more important component to this. And what I think you will get because I look at this book and I see so much of my own ambition in it, what I seek to do with my work in reaching men with narrative and with story, is for the reaction to be, I'm not alone. That is the most important thing in the world for men in today's world, because I guarantee you, as you go through those 25 stories, the one thread in all of them is a horrific sense of despondent loneliness in dealing with these issues, because the world's against you. The world thinks you're wrong for even thinking of yourself or wanting to defend yourself or seeking justice or seeking love or fair treatment or any of this. And as I read through these stories, I was reminded of what the men's movement has done for me, the communication with other men and hearing their stories and having the opportunity to tell mine over and over again, is that I didn't feel alone anymore. I can't even begin to describe the power of that in my own life personally, and it's why I highly recommend that you get this book and read it.
Yes. And what you're describing too, I think, happens at these ICMI conferences. It's that same sense, we're not alone,
Yeah, very powerful. And I do hope too that some women, of course, I don't know, who has bought the book so far, but I do hope that some open-minded women will also read the book and realize what it looks like from the other side of the equation. And because and part of the reason that I put the book together was because I was tired of the lack of empathy in so many women. I gave a talk a couple years ago in Northern Ontario. I was invited by somebody who has tried to start a series of talks on issues of contemporary importance to the community. And so he wanted me to come in and talk about the situation of young men in North American society. And I made it one of those really super fact-based, statistics-heavy kind of talks, because I've often had the experience of people saying, well, these are just anecdotes, they don't mean anything. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go through, I'm going to use stats, CAN data about the situation of young men. I'm going to talk about all the things you just mentioned, suicide and men dropping out of school, the numbers of women versus men at university, all of the various disciplines where men's numbers are in sharp decline and all that kind of thing. And so I did that. And at the end, a woman stood up and said, and basically, she didn't say it outright, but she basically said, 35 years ago, when I was working in an office, a man told me I should be having babies instead of working in the office. And she didn't actually make the connection, but the idea was that therefore, any suffering that men are experiencing today is only just recompense for this what was really a very trivial, and idiosyncratic, well, maybe not totally idiosyncratic, but certainly a relatively trivial harm that she had experienced. And obviously this was the worst thing that had ever happened to her, because it was what she brought forward as her trauma that she had lived with for the past 35 years.
Her
so
trauma.
Yeah, that was the word. I mean, she didn't say that, but that was the implication, was that this was the worst thing that had happened to her. She'd carried it around, she'd nursed it, she'd covered it over, like a pearl around a little grain of sand. And as a result of that, she does not have to care. Why should she care about young men committing suicide, or young men being kicked out of university because they tried to strike up a friendship with a girl, or young men losing their jobs because a woman told a false story about how he made her feel uncomfortable? Why should she care about any of that? Because one man once said something to her about having babies.
Yes.
This is perfectly reminiscent of the rationalization of a sociopath.
and she got applause. And in
God.
particular, everybody applauded her for saying that.
And compare and contrast her statement and her lack of forgiveness or lack of looking for any kind of solution to all the men in your book.
Yeah.
Who are forgiving and looking for possible solutions. The two are just completely opposites.
I know.
Completely opposites. It's amazing.
It is. It's just amazing. And that kind of response from women, it's not isolated to that one case. That's a characteristic sort of response, especially from older women. In some ways that surprises me. Women my age are older. I never had bad experiences at all. My generation was a generation of women that were told we could do anything, had all sorts of encouragement and by both men and women in my life. So I don't even believe these women when they pretend to tell me that they faced all this opposition. So you get hysteria and accusations of being a rape apologist from young women, and then you get this kind of really mean-spirited, bitter begrudging of any empathy from older women. So yes. I thought, well, maybe there some female readers might be reachable with these stories of men's pain, and
They are, Janice. You will definitely reach women with this. My material reaches women that make contact with me on a regular basis, and if women can see past my delivery, then I can promise you they should. Well, I can't imagine why some of them wouldn't think of their sons, their brothers, their husbands, their fathers, the men in their life who they lean on and depend on when they're reading these stories. We got a cultural problem. I agree with how women are socialized to be indifferent to the pain of men, but some women beat the system on that too, and they turn around, and that's how we get some progress out of this deal.
Indeed. So is that a good place to stop?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Janice, you have
Buy
any
the book.
last thoughts?
Buy the book.
That's Paul's last thought. Janice, you got any last
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, my last thought is that obviously we need to have both men and women. I mean, the fact of men's lack of hatred of women is on one hand obviously encouraging,
Yes.
and quite remarkable, actually, awe-inspiring to me. Really, that has most impressed me about men, how wrong the feminist narrative is. What a lie it is. That there's all this hatred out there.
May I add something to that, though, briefly?
No.
This is also part of the problem.
That's what I was going to say. Exactly. It's part of the problem,
men's inability to get angry and to set limits with women and say no and start learning to take care of themselves. You know, of course, just like a lot of other narrative busting material, your book blows the lid off the whole idea of men's privilege and who they are about women and misogyny and all that. But one of the things, this is why I hold men's feet to the fire all the time, is we get what we put up with in life. And
it's
there's
true.
no way around that.
That's true. The couples therapy I've done over the years, a lot of time I spend teaching the men how to say no, because they have a really hard time with that.
Yeah.
And the women don't have a hard time with saying no.
No, but they have a hard time hearing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true too. That's true too. But the men need to learn that, just like you're saying, Paul. Say no sometimes. You've got to stand up and say no.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so that is the thing that it's both encouraging and discouraging. Men's willingness to keep on taking it.
That's a good point.
To keep on showing up for work and to keep on defending women and being concerned about women's issues and not standing up for men. And I hope that some men reading my book will say, okay, this is, it's time now. It's time now to take back our authority, not in a hateful way, but in a firm,
strong way.
Yeah.
Not hateful, but by God, get the job done.
Yeah.
Get her done. The truck driver said.
Yep.
That's good. Indeed, buy this book. Buy the book. You're going to enjoy it, but it's also going to give you plenty of stories, ammunition to understand things and to let people know more about what you learn. So are we good then, guys?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, Janice, thank you for the book. Really appreciate all your good work.
Yes, thank you very much for compiling that and the editing. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Great, you appreciate it.
And it's so important. And I like the idea of a website later. That's good.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see you then. Take care all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.